Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to week 5 of our online machine learning sessions. So today we will start our new topic, which is about support vector machines, and these are also known as SVMs. And we will try to discuss in detail about the introductory part of SVMs as well as the functions and the detailed description of a support vector machine. Before I move on to support vector machine, let me give a quick recap of whatever we discussed in our last lecture. So in our last lecture, we covered the neural networks, which is a very important topic in machine learning, and we started from the very beginning or scratch the basics of neural networks. We studied firstly a single perceptron, and we saw different components of a perceptron, and we saw that how we perform learning in a perceptron. We saw that we have a number of inputs. Those inputs are being multiplied by its corresponding weights, and then we have activation function through which we decide that whether the neuron will fire or not. And we discussed a number of activation functions in which the most commonly used activation functions were the sigmoidal function and a step function and a sign function, and we saw differences between each activation function, and we also discussed that what were the differences in the outcomes for each activation function. Then from single perceptron, we move on to single layer perceptron, and because we had some limitations for single perceptron, and in order to overcome those limitations, we move from single perceptron to a single layer perceptron, in which we had an input layer and an output layer, and we had a number of neurons. And then we saw that how can we perform learning in a single layer perceptron, and what are the problems which we can solve through single layer perceptron. And then we discussed the limitations of single layer perceptron, because single layer perceptron was unable to solve some more complex problems. And then we move on from single layer perceptron to multi-layer perceptrons, and then we discussed that how a multi-layer perceptron is different from a single layer perceptron, what are the differences and what are the commonalities between the two, and how can we perform learning in a multi-layer perceptron. So initially we discussed different components of an MLP. We saw that we have an input layer and an output layer, very similar to a single layer perceptron, but now we have some hidden layers in between the input layer and output layer. And we also discussed that these hidden layers can be varied from one hidden layer to two hidden layers, and depending upon the problems, you can also have more than two hidden layers. So after discussing this architecture, we then discussed how we can have connections between different neurons in each layer, and we discussed in detail that how a fully connected network will perform its learning from a training input data set. So from learning perspective, we discussed the delta algorithm or the delta rule, as well as the backpropagation algorithm. So we had spent quite a time on backpropagation algorithm because I feel that it is a very important algorithm, and sometimes students do feel difficulty in understanding the backpropagation algorithm. So we also saw a numerical example in which we trained an exclusive OR logic gate through a multi-layer perceptron, and we saw that how can we adjust the weights. We also discussed that how we can compute the error term at the output layer, and then how we can propagate this error on the backward layers, for example the hidden layer and then the previous hidden layer and then back on the input layer. And by using this error term, we basically updated the weights or the connections or the values of the connections of each layer. And then we saw that by using those weights, our network is basically performing the classification. So this was all about neural networks. We have also seen a number of practical applications in which neural networks are performing and solving complex problems nowadays. Now, another important algorithm along with neural network, which was being used very commonly before the emergence of these deep networks, and that algorithm is called support vector machine. And mostly this algorithm is for classification, but sometimes people also use it for regression problems. Also, in support vector machine, we will start it from the very basic, and then we will go to some advanced features in support vector machine, and then we will see that how these machines can be used to perform binary classification or a multi-class classification. So here you can see a figure which is basically a general description of a support vector machine. So you can see here that we have two subsets of data belonging to two different classes, and then we have a hyperplane, which is basically a decision boundary which is being which is able through which we are able to distinguish between these two classes. And then you can see we have some margin here and we have some support vector here. So all these things we will be discussing in this lecture. Okay, so let's start from the very beginning. One of the most prevailing and exciting supervised learning models with associated learning algorithms that analyze data and recognize patterns is support vector machines. So as I told you, that support vector machines before the emergence of deep learning algorithms were very prevailing algorithms, and they used to work under supervised learning domain and with its associated learning algorithms. So these algorithms were being used to analyze different types of data, and they tend to recognize different patterns in the data through the support vector machine. So one thing is that we will be discussing the support vector machines here in a supervised learning domain, which you know that we have some labeled or output target class, and we will try to learn our support vector machine through those labels of the data or the target values of the data. It is used for solving both regression and classification problems. Support vector machines are, if I say that 70% usage of a support vector machine is for classification, and that is both for binary classification as well as multi-classification problems. But sometimes people also use the support vector machines in order to figure out the relationship between two variables, in which one can be a dependent variable, another can be a independent variable, and they try to do a regression analysis between different variables through support vector machines. However, it is mostly used in solving classification problems. So the basic usage of a support vector machine is to perform classification on the basis of some features which can be computed through different ways, and we basically fed those features into a support vector machine, and support vector machine performs classification based on those extracted features. So here is a little bit history of SVMs. SVMs was proposed or introduced in 1992 and has become popular due to success in handwritten digit recognition in 94. So in 1994, people used support vector machines to perform handwritten digit classifications, in which they have different digits written by hand, and they tested support vector machines to recognize them. And support vector machines did really quite well in order to recognize those digits, and it provided very good results with higher accuracy rates. And when people received some good accuracy rates, then they also used SVMs in other recognition tasks as well, such as face recognition or fingerprint recognition. So they started, support vector machines started back in 1992, and they were tested successfully in 94 on the handwritten digit classification tasks.